Thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here. So today I want to share with you kind of a few kind of work over the years. We are thinking about personal informatics in this changing social world. I want to tell you a little bit about kind of what I mean by that. So we know we have a lot of technologies that help people to monitor and establish their healthy habits, right? All the phone apps, all the kind of watches, and everything that you can possibly use to keep track of kind of your healthy routines and things that you want to know about yourself. And this is not a new area. Like the personal informatics field has been established for more than 10 years and maybe even like over around 20 years by now. We have a lot of kind of the good understanding about how people collect their data, how they make sense of them. We have a lot of models that help us kind of to create this kind of theoretical conversation about what's the best way to support people to do this. We have a lot of technology and systems right now. And the most important thing is we also as a field, we kind of started to realize that, people don't live in the vacuum. We live in the very social world. A lot of our healthy behavior or unhealthy behavior that we do it with other people. We use the system to technologies and share data with other people. And so for my own work, like starting from when I was a PhD student at University of Washington, we started kind of explore kind of different ways people use this data together across kind of clinical care, within families, within different sort of communities and working space. And thinking about kind of what does it mean to when we call it personal informatics data, but what does it mean to use it in a more social collaborative way? And so today I'm going to start and then kind of using this example of healthy eating and like food experience throughout the talk, kind of to give you an idea of like kind of what we think about personal informatics kind of situated in the eating, cooking, and the experience. And I'm really glad that I think one of the benefits of doing this as a lunch talk and then doing it on a Zoom is like I'm hoping that you all have your lunch with you, because I'm going to share a lot of food photos in this talk. So bear with me. So the first project that I kind of want to kind of take you back a little bit to kind of look at part of my dissertation work, looking at how can we redesign photo-based diaries to support collaboration between people and their health providers. We know food diaries is a very important kind of artifact and tool for people to monitor their health and then kind of to find their triggers to their symptoms and then just to understand kind of health behavior in your everyday life. But food diaries, even today, are pretty terrible, I have to say. Like, you still look at kind of this kind of paper diaries all the time if you going to a doctor's office and dietitian's office, because they really like the way paper diaries that help you kind of to be able to kind of highlight things. They can lay it out in front of you, like easier to kind of interact with. But for people who are carrying them, it's horrible. Like if you go to a party, then you have to take it out of your pocket and then to kind of write something down, or like just being able to remember to bring them with you. It's pretty daunting. A lot of the food diary apps today, they are mostly still kind of database based. So they give you some food database so they can choose data, kind of the type of food you have. You can select them. So it makes it a lot easier than kind of writing everything down. But they predominantly kind of populated with kind of more kind of restaurant food or takeout food or kind of like already made food that you can see from your grocery store or something like that. But it's kind of hard for you to actually try to put the food you made at home and with kind of listing all the ingredients and all the combination of ingredients that you put in. So a lot of research has shown that this kind of diaries has the potential of nudging people to eat more kind of frozen food or ready-made food instead of kind of making your food on your own, just because it's too much hassle to check. As a field, like in HCIL, we actually has a lot of research, including a lot of researchers here in Maryland, showing that photo diaries can be helpful in a lot of these situations. They are easier to do. A lot of people are doing it for Instagram. And so it's not awkward to take a photo before you eat. You capture a lot more context. So you're looking at a photo, you remember whether that's the restaurants that you were going to, or you were eating this in a birthday party, or you're just eating in front of your like desktop. So it helps people kind of remember why they are eating the things they eat and kind of what kind of decision they made at the time, and so that you can help with reflection and making kind of recommendation based on those. But the question at the time that we were thinking is, we know photo diaries are useful for individuals. Are they useful for kind of in a like a medical situation, in healthcare situation? How do we actually make them useful? We started to look at this different contexts where people might use diaries with their health experts, health providers. We want to look at situations where people keep track of food intake, but also, working with experts in a variety of different ways to make sense of the data. So one context that we look at was people, just general people has healthy eating goals. And these people usually can look for behavior change strategies. How can I eat better? How can I be more fit? Oftentimes people work with health coaches, nutritionists, or dietitians that are outside of the clinic. So not a lot of people go into a clinic to work with doctors on these kind of issues. But another context that we are kind of in contrasting with that, we were looking at people with irritable bowel syndrome. So we're looking at these people who actually have chronic pain or diarrhea, like acute symptoms that could be caused by food, but it's very hard to identify what triggers are. So their kind of perpetual goal is just to be able to identify triggers for individuals, and also sometimes these triggers can change over time. So how do we actually keep track of those and understand how we can adjust kind of the food intake in different times? And so a lot of these people work with physicians, nurses, dietitians, more in the clinical settings. So we're looking at two kind of very similar contexts, but also different to understand how we can actually design food diaries to support this kind of consultation. We decided as part of my dissertation that design this photo-based food diary app. We call it Footprint. So basically we ask them to take a photo of their food whenever people eat. We ask them one contextual questions to help them to contextualize the photos a little bit. Sometimes it can be, if there are things they're adding on the food that's hard to see from the photos, and sometimes there'll be, what you're eating with, where you're eating. And then they'll keep track of symptoms. If they have symptoms, we also pop these questions in a frequency that they define. So some people would have symptoms every 4 hours or like every 6 hours, so that they can choose that. And then on the website, we create this kind of visual summary to help them kind of look at their food across time. So we categorize the food based on when they have no symptoms, when they have mild symptoms, and when they have very severe symptoms. So the idea is by looking at all this food in different columns, they will identify some potential food triggers that are causing like severe symptoms, for example, or like they will see some food just it will be shown across columns. That means they might not actually doing anything to your symptoms. So this kind of gives you some idea. This is the IBS version. We also developed slightly different versions of healthy eating goals, just to kind of help people to keep track of this food based on their healthy eating goals. But for the time of this talk, I'm just going to show you there. But if you're interested, I'm happy to talk about this more. We deploy this system to a serious cohort of kind of IBS patients and people with health eating goals. So we install the app on their system, on their phone, and then we have them go back to keep track of their food in the time that's kind of according to clinical guidelines. And then we have them invite them back to see with the dietitians kind of to review this data together. And so there are a lot of interesting things we find in those kind of dietary consultation sessions. One of the things that we were also surprised to find was in the beginning, when we kind of brought up this project with talking about this with a lot of dietitians and clinicians, they were actually kind of skeptical, because they were used to use, like kind of nutritions, ingredients, and like calories, and then like amount, numbers, and to kind of do the analysis. So they were saying like, I can't get any of those in the photos. How do I actually do my job? But when we went through all these kind of sessions, a lot of the dietitians actually really like it. This dietitian told us that they think they actually get more information of what patients' meals look like. They like that they are able to kind of see what are they eating, what situation were they eating, kind of how were they feeling when they ate it, how did they prepare it. And so there's a lot more information that's embedded in the photos that give dietitians better ideas of what the eating situation looked like. We also saw that because people are really good at visuals, so like being able to see those food visually make it very easy for dietitians and clinicians to actually identify some potential triggers, and they can spend more time on working through that and thinking about alternatives or like kind of other ways to kind of accommodate those potential food restrictions. So for example, this patients during the study, they found that maybe garlic and onions could be potential triggers. And these are also kind of typical food triggers for people with IBS. So, but this patient was really sad because she's really enjoying kind of nice food, the flavor of the food. She said that said herself was a foodie. And so then they spent a lot of time with the dietitian talking about how can they actually keep the flavor of the food, like giving her suggestions like using green tops or scallions, using olive oil infused garlic, use asafoetida, like other alternatives that still keep the flavor and make it easy for her to follow, so that and it doesn't kind of lose too much of the quality of her life. We were also really surprised. This was a really interesting story that in this photo that you'll see that this person has really simple food, like a diet. She pretty much eat the same thing every day. Like this, you see it's all the same coffee in all the columns. You see the same kind of yogurt with granola, and you see the same banana and like carrots and tomatoes everywhere. But she was still in pain, and it was kind of really suffering. And then if you look at this photo, you see, it doesn't look like we're helping her in any way, because these are the same thing. They are just all over. But the doctor actually came in and sit down in like 2-3 minutes. She started to say, hey, it looks like all your photos were taken in front of a steering wheel. And so it turned out like that this patient was a social worker. So her job includes just driving everywhere to visit the clients. And then she never had time to actually sit down on a table to eat. She always eat on the go. And then she has to bring food with her and eating in the car. And so like this actually prompted the doctor to kind of think about maybe, this kind of stress or lifestyle was the trigger of the food, like of the symptoms, not actually the food itself. So instead of kind of restricting her diet more, they were actually thinking about what are some of the strategies we can use to help you to manage the stress better, and maybe adding some food back to your diet that they are delicious and nutritious, and then it's easy for you to actually eat on the go. People also use kind of photos as a way to kind of give actionable recommendation. These participants realized like large portion meals could be potential triggers for his symptoms. So they spend a lot of time kind of thinking about whether they can break down his meals across days, and asking if that's reasonable recommendation for him, what kind of work he did. They also look at the photo to see, hey, this one might be a reasonable kind of amount of food, and then with like the amount of nutrients that's useful for you. But some of this might be, they might want to add something more to it, so that they can use the photo as a kind of guide after the visit, and they can still kind of follow this. So we see like a variety of different ways people using photos and then being able to identify triggers to kind of create kind of personalized diagnosis recommendations, and using these photos as a way kind of to guide their kind of actions after. But what also interests us is like, it's not just the things that are in the plate that has been useful. There's a lot of rich information that are captured in the photos that being used kind of widely from our dietitians and clinicians. And that actually led us to think about, we all know these eating contexts are very important, but they are often very difficult to capture. Dietitians and kind of clinicians, like our health expert, they know this, right? They're very good at this. When you go to them, they will ask a bunch of questions, like what kind of work you do, what kind of life you have. Is this a typical kind of day of your of the week? But that often requires a lot of these kind of back and forth questions, and then someone has to remember to ask these questions. And we know that we often make eating decisions not just because of the food or the calories, but sometimes because we are having these work meetings, and so we don't care about the food that much because this is very important context for us, or like we are enjoying this like friend gathering, so we that's what kind of make us to make these decisions about food. But how do we actually kind of being able to capture those kind of contexts, and then being able to kind of use those contexts in a useful way when thinking about how we can help people to eat healthier or in a more kind of pleasant way. So we started thinking this question and kind of shifting our focus a little bit to kind of other contexts where kind of food and then kind of food decisions are important. So the next project that I'm going to talk about is the project we're kind of thinking about kind of family members in the family context, because we know this is also a very common context that people will eat with other people and kind of determine what you eat. So like I said, we know like food and eating is a very significant social experience for a lot of families, whether that's Taco Tuesday, Waffle Sunday, or just different kind of holidays, meals, or just different rituals the family have about their meals. They are all kind of very oftentimes very collaborative. But talking about healthy eating, if you put a house on it, it sometimes becomes kind of very challenging, because people start to think about how how to monitor each other, like kind of having a lot of like difficult conversation about whether it's right for you to eat this, or whether kind of you should eat less of something. And our systems like don't really help us with those kind of situations. So if you search kind of family food, in like a Google Play or like Apple Store, iOS store, that these are some of the system that will show up. They are very pretty, like, there are a lot of photos and they're very colorful. But if you look at the kind of what the focus are, there's still a lot of them still focus on calorie counting. They still focus on kind of ingredients and then kind of the portions of that. And a lot of these kind of things are not particularly interesting when we are trying to having conversation with family. They sometimes also kind of focus on the more kind of conflicting like situation that we will experience. So we kind of started to think about, if we want to kind of promote healthy eating in families, what are some of the things people actually care, and what are some of the contexts that we can kind of leverage, and then to think about kind of how to promote this kind of conversation in families. So we started with this particular family setting. The family has all kinds, but we started with this context where family members living in different households, mostly around kind of adult children and their parents or other family members. And the reason was we think this is an interesting context where people apparently care about what each other are eating. Oftentimes, food and kind of eating experience are part of the conversation. But they also kind of could have different kind of agency and different values about food, and that's where kind of potential tensions can come from, and potential kind of the communication might be needed in those kind of situations. So we we interview 16 older parents and 9 adult children to kind of think about, ask about kind of what their experience has been like, talking about healthy eating, and kind of what is it like when they kind of start having this conversation. One thing that we found is like, although like we think, family, it feels like a very kind of constant, like a context where, people cook every day, eat every day. Maybe they sometimes go out for eating. Maybe they have like celebrate some important kind of situation. But there's actually a lot of other things that actually determine when people why people choose what they eat and when people choose what they eat. And one of the things that we found out is like there's actually a lot of context change in family, even if it feels very constant. And also people take new roles when those context change happen. For example, we found out that when adult children move away, it's actually pretty much it's a really big deal for a lot of the older parents. They'll say that they lose motivation to cook. They didn't know, like they used to be need to cook for like 4 or 5 people. Now they're just cooking for their own. And so that's kind of challenging for them to think about, how can I make something for my own and it's still kind of interesting. And there's a lot of kind of parallel study in Indiana University actually found out in rural communities in Indiana that loneliness is one of the kind of big factor for rural adults who don't eat well and like don't kind of spend enough time and kind of taking care of their like eating behavior. Like the food security problem is real, but even when they have kind of resources and have the means to do it, like feeling lonely make people like not wanting to actually kind of take care of their kind of healthy eating in that sense. On the contrary, like when new members join the family, that's it's like more kind of happy moments, but also that's a time where people start thinking about, what is healthy eating mean in the family. Like a lot of grandparents tell us that they don't care about what they eat, that their children decide what they want to eat. But then when there's a baby in the family, they'll say, oh, I don't want my grandchildren to become like mac and cheese baby, or a chicken nugget baby. I want them to know what food what real food looks like, and what are some of the interesting experiences with food they can have. And of course, when adult children kind of realizing their parents are aging and having like some of the kind of chronic conditions, that's when this conversation usually happen, and children often take over kind of the healthy eating role and then become the food preparer, or at least like a suggesting food healthy eating recommendations, and that's where sometimes tensions can come from. And then if someone in the family has health condition, of course, like this will often trigger kind of healthy eating conversation. And we know like this happens all the time. And there are also like kind of a lot of ways that people have been addressing some of these changes. For example, like we did a study before the pandemic, but this is like very common thing to do during the pandemic is people would cook together across distance. Like our participant already saying that that's what they did, but you see this more commonly when we cannot get together. Like this was a photo that I got from New York Times in the beginning of the pandemic. And this woman that was trying to cook her birthday meal with her grandma's recipe where they couldn't see each other. So there are a lot of kind of ways people use technology to kind of recreate some of the shared experience so that the kind of communication about this kind of experience would be more kind of, there's more context they can bring in, and then they can build on their kind of shared kind of memory in those kind of things. We also have seen more and more people using kind of meal kit services. They will send like care package or like using Blue Apron or like kind of other this kind of service to make sure that their loved ones actually have like good groceries and then they know what they're eating. But these are just like some of the examples, kind of the new services people are using. But I think there's a lot more, right? Especially thinking about, what are we actually helping people to be able to kind of talk about this and also kind of capturing this in your day-to-day conversation. Especially thinking about, going back to like when oftentimes when people access the healthy eating technologies, they are often not kind of thinking about this changing context, when people move away, when you have new member in the family, when things happen in everyday life, right? Like most of the technology we have today kind of focusing on helping people to establish habits, good routines, which are very important. They have been very kind of useful. So 10,000 steps a day, 2,000 calories, or like decreasing coffee intake if that's what your goal is. But they don't often think about, your days and your everyday might not be the same, right? Like what if you are traveling, that you don't have the same kind of food resources you have, and over the pandemic, that's a lot of us experience, like you don't get the same kind of grocery that you have to before. Or like if you are kind of doing the midterm or finals and not having coffee intake might be challenging. And so what are some of the ways that you can survive, the deadlines, but still kind of adhering to your goals? So not just in the family settings, in our everyday life, we experience a lot of different kind of change of context in small and in big ways. But our technology, thinking about healthy eating, often account for that. So kind of building from kind of what we learn in the family, we want to see what are some of the other ways people have been kind of dealing with and kind of being able to support their healthy eating behavior through different changes in life. So right when this pandemic started, we were kind of thinking about kind of how do technology support this kind of different transitions, that's what we call them, and not just for yourself, but also in the social context. And this is fortunate and unfortunate that when pandemic happens, it gave us like a really kind of a wide window into different kind of routine transitions. We didn't expect this will happen, but we took the kind of opportunity kind of to look into this pandemic created like huge transitions for everyone and in all sorts of different ways. And how do people actually kind of their food related experience being impacted? How do people cope with this cooking and eating when all these different level and different types of transitions happen? And what technology people have been using, and if we were to design other technology, how do we help people to manage these transitions? So we did this kind of recruit this study kind of widely. A lot of the local communities we kind of reach out to. We also do nationwide recruitment. We had a lot of survey responses, and we were able to kind of interview 17 of them. And these are the people who kind of experience all sorts of kind of life events or like kind of routine transitions, including relationships, health, or some people lost their career, people move and has experienced other kind of stressful events in their life. So we are kind of still in kind of the process of kind of make sense of all this rich data. There are some really kind of touching stories in there, but I'm just want to share with you kind of some of the things that we saw, and then we think that kind of warrant kind of thinking more deeply about. So I'm going to tell you a few kind of stories about people's experience. So this participant is a 35 to 44 years male, and he experienced a job loss. So he lost his job in the beginning of the pandemic. And what happened was that he said that before he lost his job, they are all very busy. So they eat very kind of quick and convenient food. So just want to get things ready and eat. But then because he lost his job, then he stayed at home. So then he had to kind of take responsibility for getting food ready, because his wife had to do a second job, so to kind of accommodate with kind of the financial stress. And then so in the beginning, he actually was kind of hesitant and also like not liking the job. He has to kind of get up early and then to make sure dinner is ready. But then the more time he spent on it, he actually found out he actually enjoyed cooking, because he can spend more time to prepare the things, and he can be more intentional about the food they are eating as a family. So there's a few kind of different transitions that's happening, kind of the mindset and also in kind of the coordination between family that's happening here. That's just not just he losing his job, but also the family has to kind of to come together to figure out a new routine, and also kind of to have this conversation about who's taking kind of what kind of job and what are we coping as a family. And this not always easy. Like in this example, it turns out that everyone liking their new roles and then being able to help each other and then having a more stable situation. But it's not always easy when these kind of things happen. Another thing that we saw that was interesting is like we saw that people often have conflicting values about food and also their healthy behavior. So this was a female who kind of the major kind of life event experience was like they started to work at home. Everyone started to work at home. And then she said that before the pandemic, this is a family who really care about their relationship with food. So they never ate out. They always make things from scratch. But during the pandemic, they feel like a lot of local business were struggling. And they also feel like, just being stay at home, cooking every day has been a little kind of exhausting. So they decided that they are going to take out like once a week, just to be able to support local business. But they didn't like that. They feel like they were spending more money on kind of takeout food. Those were more processed than they would have done, on their own. They also, because they spend more money, they couldn't kind of spend enough, the same amount of money they spend on the quality kind of ingredients they would otherwise be getting. So there's a lot of different kind of values they were showing here. It's like one is like on one hand is the kind of the quality of food they were asking, and then they were also kind of the relationship they have with the food versus kind of like supporting local community. And then also like on top of that, it's all stress and the pandemic is triggering. So this kind of conflicts probably already exists before the pandemic, but all these kind of changes and kind of the transitions are just making all this kind of coupling values more salient and amplifying them and making it difficult for people to actually prioritize and knowing what to do at the moment. When a lot of the transitions happen, people often need a lot of space for emotion and to be able to reflect on what had happened. So this story comes from a participant whose father passed away during the pandemic, and then at the same time she was experiencing a career change. And then she was saying she's suffering from a lot of stress, and her father actually passed away because of COVID in the nursing home. So this was one of those tragic kind of moments where she couldn't even visit her father. They never know what happened. And so it was very hard on her. And so she was saying like the whole time she was really angry about, that things had happened. It really make it very hard for her to kind of accept what has happened. And so she started kind of finding herself to eat more ice cream, just because ice cream is the thing that she used to enjoy with her father growing up. They made like special dishes like called it ice cream soup and other kind of different variations of ice creams. So she found that she started doing that as a way to remembering her father and then to cope with kind of the emotional kind of impact. But she also feel guilty about it. She feel like that's not very healthy. That's like at odds to her kind of healthy eating goals. So then she do a lot of kind of things like weighing the ice cream on a scale, trying to find ice creams that are has less fat or less sugar, less calories, or just a lot of different ways that help her to kind of balance all these emotional needs and also kind of the healthy goals she has. So the whole process was very complicated for her to kind of wrap her head around what has happened, but also being able to kind of adhere to those healthy eating practices she used to have. And the last stories I want to share is like, we already see this, like all these changes are not just one problem. They're not just impacting one aspect of your kind of food practices. So this is a story come from a female who kind of major things that she mentioned that it was she loss of childcare, as a lot of people do during the pandemic. And then she found out that when that happens, what happened is a chain effect of events that she has to think about. So usually she said that her daughter would be kind of having meals in the childcare, facility, and then they will have dietitians actually know how to feed their child well. And when she suddenly was home, they don't know what to do. They didn't feel like they are capable of actually making every meals for her children, so that then they can eat healthily. And also they used to do meal planning. So like they would do kind of to do one grocery shopping like in the beginning of the week. And then, but when there's a kind of COVID outbreak and in the childcare facility, then her child suddenly come home on Tuesday, they found out they actually didn't have food for the kid. So they had to kind of struggling to figure out what to do with that. On top of that, it's like because there was a potential COVID exposure, they were not supposed to go out, and so they were supposed to kind of keep others in the community safe. So they can't do grocery shopping. They had to either do it online or rely on their friends to help them with the grocery shopping. And because of the children were at home, so like they had to kind of give them more snacks so they can be quiet when they are having meetings and working at the same time. They try to find like a healthier snack, but still like they feel very guilty about having to feed their children more snacks so that so everyone can work at the same time. So there's a lot of different things that kind of one affect another. Some of this we actually have solutions. For example, like online grocery shopping could potentially kind of fit into this space. But the whole kind of figuring out this process and some of the kind of emotionally impacting the guilt they are feeling, like it's really hard to kind of being able to kind of just replace that with technology. So knowing what we know now, thinking about, starting from kind of the context of eating, the context actually changed, and then your roles of your relationship with kind of food, and also kind of some of the healthy behavior change. How can we think about all these different things when we think about designing personal informatics technologies? I mean, there are a lot of in this space, and some of the things that my students and I have been thinking about right now, some of the directions are kind of thinking about, we just talked about like these transitions can create a lot of different kind of chain effect and impact other aspects of life. That's not just food, right? Although we use kind of food as an example to look at this situation, a lot of other aspects and other values you have about kind of as other parts of your life actually impact you. And so this contextual and environmental conditions often change with or without you kind of noticing them. You, like, for example, you might lose your usual like sources of getting food. You might not be able to cook the food the same way that you want. You might have, lose your time of cooking because your child is at home. And there's a lot of other kind of ways that these kind of little impacts and contextual factors affect your ability to adhere to your healthy eating goals. But they are not often kind of, like we said, contextual factors are already hard to kind of keep track of in kind of everyday personal informatics data. They are especially kind of challenging when they are changing. Kind of being able to thinking about how to capture and incorporate some of these kind of contextual changes so people can kind of evaluate kind of their situation during this transition, and maybe like helping other people who would help them to be able to understand all these effects and being able to give kind of realistic kind of support and recommendations. And so this is some of the directions that my students are kind of thinking about right now. Another way that we were thinking about is this notion that we said about kind of conflicting and shifting values. They often become more salient during transitions. We actually have a lot of technology starting to support some of kind of these notions of kind of what is important in your life. A lot of time technology are supporting more direct values, for example, like goals, like, what is healthy eating mean to you? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to eat more balanced? Do you want to identify some triggers to your allergy? Those kind of more direct goals are often easier to be captured. There are also some kind of work have been looking at kind of like more abstract and more qualitative goals and how to kind of conceptualize that and then implement that into kind of all these personal informatics technologies. But we want to kind of broaden that kind of thinking a little bit more about kind of these values about other parts of the life often influence food decisions. but it might be hard to kind of think about that alongside with the things that we track and we capture. So how do we help people to capture, to reflect? Sometimes they have to try it off. Sometimes they have to communicate with other people and negotiate these values during the transitions. I think these are some of the other things that we're thinking about kind of coming into kind of personal informatics research. And the last thing is like, there's a lot of this kind of conversation around kind of using kind of AI technologies or machine learning technology to help us to understand the personal informatics data better. And then, so how do we actually, what we learn from all this contact, all these changes, and this kind of social information that people actually care and value about, how do we actually kind of teach them to our AI system? So like one typical experience, because I work a lot with food photos, computer vision is a thing that people mention a lot. And we look at all the kind of computer vision algorithms today, a lot of them still focus on kind of single photo recognition. They use all these data sets that are very beautiful, pretty, and very recognizable. And they try to kind of focus on kind of the calorie counting and kind of ingredients in there. But if you look at the food photo we have, so on the right-hand side, this photo is what we capture from a study. We currently are deploying the footprint app that we developed to kind of Indiana pregnancy women for around like 3 years now. So we have like around 400 people using them right now. So these are some of the photos they capture. So if you look at these photos, these are the kind of the real life photos, right? They are not the Google image photo on the left. And then look at this one, like there's little like a white blob and then blue blob on there. As a human, you probably know this probably is a cake, and probably some special situation because they are using kind of disposable plates, and then you recognize this is a cake. But the computer vision algorithms don't often know what this is. They look at the white color blocks and then blue color blocks. And then they often take out of the plates and then to kind of try to figure out what it is. So there's a lot of context that would be missing using the current computer vision algorithm. So how do we think about all this when we are trying to say, hey, it's okay, you have this special occasion that someone celebrating your birthday, it's okay you eat cake, for this one cake occasion. But we're going to look at the rest of your food and then seeing like if you are actually having the healthy eating patterns. We're going to look at, if you have balanced food and across different kind of meals, and also kind of thinking about some other health goals you have, not just for calorie counting. So these are also some of the work we're working with kind of some of the computer scientists at Indiana University, and then to think about how do we teach AI systems the things that we know today. So with that, I'm going to just conclude my talk here, and because I'm really excited to have more conversation with all of you here. And then, so these are some of the questions, we keep thinking about in different contexts. So if you have any thoughts and any ideas with all of this, happy to answer questions here, but also kind of happy to do kind of more collaboration in the future. Thank you.